Thank you for coming back, and thank you if you're new as well. I thought what I'd do to kick off is to do a quick summary of what we've covered so far. And this was the slide I ended on last night. And there's this fantastic waxwing, which we occasionally get in Hampshire. So we did 8 last night, steps 1 to 8, and we did 4 to start with. So there was taxonomy, which was all about trying to sort the bird that you're seeing to a family, or even better, a genus, or maybe even to a species. And then we did the big 3, which can really help you suss out what you might likely to see, depending on where, what, and when you are. So location is where you are, and you will remember that I talked about capercaillies only being in Scotland, but then in Hampshire, you've got really good chances of seeing Dartford warblers and firecrest, and you certainly won't see a Dartford warbler up in Scotland. So location's a real point. So if you're on the south coast of Hampshire, you'll be looking for waders and ducks at this time of year, and maybe the odd diver. If you're inland in the forest, you might be lucky enough to see a great grey shrike. So locations helps you to refine your possibilities that you might see. Habitat is what you're in. So I've alluded to that a little bit. So if you're at the seaside or in a marsh, you can expect to see wading birds and wetland birds. If you're in a dry forest in the middle of the New Forest, or say up in the Thames Valley Basin, they will give you a different set of birds because the habitat dictates where the birds can live. And lastly, we looked at season and we talked about winter migrants, summer migrants, and all year residents like robins and nuthatches. Then we moved on to a couple of others, which were lighting and distance. And you may remember I was emphasizing how much lighting can affect what you see. And you always need to be thinking about how it could change the way that the bird was looking. And you may remember there were a couple of shots of sooty shearwaters, one being well lit and really quite bleached out, and then another in dull light, which was showing its true colors. Then we moved on to distance, and we talked about storks right up close, and then thermaling. And I alluded to the buzzard trick and the robin trick of looking with and without bins at birds that are getting further away, and then just using your naked eyes to see if you can identify the species. And then lastly, we looked at behavior, which included things such as jizz, which are characteristic moves that are unique to birds. And we looked at like peregrine falcons stooping, gannets plunge diving, and dunnocks wing flicking. And then we came on to sound, where I confess I had a little bit of a technical glitch last night and things were getting piled on top of one another, but we did find that sound is one of the vital things for identifying birds. So everybody should be able to do a cuckoo. Some of you might take a little more practice to distinguish between chiff-chaff and willow warbler, and then you'll be able to move on to other things like whimbrel and green woodpecker. So that was the re-intro, get us back up to speed, and let's move on now. So we've done 8 are down and we've got 4 to go, which, if you remember, so we've got the lazy Hampshire stringer loves dude birding scanning. So we have got stupidly, pishing, very and noisily to go. So let's get stuck in. Right, the next one is stupidly, which stands for structure. And structure, people say, oh, you've got to look at the structure. And they may be assuming that, you're up to speed with where they are on their birding, and you may not be. So why don't you ask them to explain what they mean by structure? And basically, structure is about the shape and size that all birds have. And some are distinctive and can identify the bird right away. And I've got a little bit of a puzzle picture over here, and I'd like you to look at it. So have a look at these silhouettes, and you can probably make a reasonable stab at most. So remember family, genus, species. There are some which are more obvious than others. So have a look at those and then we're going to have a bit of a quiz for you. In particular, perhaps look where they are. Are they on the ground? Are they perching? How are they perching? Are they upright? Are they flat? You know, what's their posture like? So having looked at these, test yourself now and see if you can find the lapwing, the kestrel, the magpie, and the bee-eater. And I'll give you a few moments to do that while I have a glug of coffee. Okay, let's think about what we've got. So let's see if we can see the lapwing first of all. Now, lapwings are quite a round bird. They're terrestrial, they go on the ground, and they have a crest, and their head is smaller than their body, and they don't have much of a tail. So in fact, we can find the lapwing quite easily. It's this one down at the bottom left-hand corner here, and it's got all the attributes. You know, it's got reasonably long legs, it's got that sort of typical plover type body, which gets you to the genus, and it's got a crest. And it's got a short bill, shorter than the head. So this is your lapwing, but you don't see any colors on this bird. And let's take another example here before I move on to the other puzzle birds. You know, this clearly at the bottom here, where I'm next to the right of the lapwing, it's a pheasant, because nothing else is that big, got a great big sharp long tail, these stout legs, a relatively small head and short bill to the body size. Okay, so that's what I mean by structure. It's about shape and size, relative things. Does it have a long tail, a short tail, a crest, no crest? Is it dumpy? Is it slim? Is it got a small bill, a big bill, a long bill, a thick bill, short legs, long legs? Let's find the kestrel now. Now, all of you, I hope, will have seen a kestrel, and you'll realize that it's a long-winged falcon. It's our commonest bird of prey, and it usually perches up. And the kestrel is this one here on the right-hand side. So relatively small head, but this rather slim, elegant, attenuated body, long wings, and a tail that's also quite long and extends beyond the wingtips. Okay, all of this structure and shape tell you that this is most likely a kestrel. Moving on to the magpie, well, they're perching birds, and you'll know that magpies have got really long tails. So which one have got really long tails here? Well, we've looked at the pheasant. This one's got quite a long tail, relatively speaking. I think this is a blackbird, but the one that really stands, oh, and here's a wagtail. That's got quite a long tail with regard to its body length. But the one that really stands out, because it's a bigger bird, is this one on the fence post, and this is our magpie. So it's got a tail which is as long as the head and body length put together. And just thinking about that, you know, this has got, the kestrel's got quite a long, the tail's almost as long as the body, but look at this one, hardly got any tail at all, very short. I'm not going to say what that one is because I don't quite know. It could be a number of things. So look at these relative lengths and bits, and how they are all in proportion, different proportions to one another. Now, bee-eater. This could be a bit of a testing one, but there is only one that fits bee-eater, and it's this one at the top left. And the reason it's a bee-eater is it's the only one in this slide that has projecting central tail feathers. Now, some of you who are perhaps a little more advanced will say, but Arctic skua's got central tail feathers that extend, and you'd be right, but you won't find an Arctic skua perching on telegraph wires. Well, I've never seen one do it, but I will tell you that you see lots of bee-eaters perched on wires. So lapwing, it's on the ground, it's got a crest, head size to body shape. Kestrel, long, slim, elegant wings, long tail. The magpie, tail length to body length about the same, and then the bee-eater is sitting on the wires up here. So for shape, you've got to look at these relative proportions of different parts of the body, and that can be really helpful. Some are quite subtle. So some of the ducks, for instance, have shorter necks, longer necks. Some of the geese are similar. They're longer necked, smaller necked. And then the other thing that is really helpful is having size. And it's great if you have a sliding scale. So if you're trying to describe a bird to somebody, have an idea of its size. Now, you may see others that are hopping nearby and you can say, well, I saw this bird, it was sort of about thrush size. That's a real help in terms of eliminating and trying to pin down the ID. Or it was between a thrush and a pigeon. So I put this list here: robin, thrush, pigeon, pheasant, and swan works for me. So if you say, well, I saw this big white bird swimming, there aren't many of those. It could be a Bewick swan, but it's highly likely to be a mute swan. So go for the commoner species first and then work out the rest of them. Moving along to structure again, there's something you're going to come across which I encourage you to get to grips with, because it will help your ID skills in so many ways. And there's a lot more to structure, and now we need to dive a little more into the detail. And I'm going to talk to you about feather maps, or topography as it's known. And it looks a bit daunting, but it isn't really. And the reason for that is you already know quite a lot of topography, but the whole of this talk is about giving a framework upon which for you to hang your bits of knowledge. So you know about wings, you know about tail, you maybe know about the rump, the belly, the legs, the head, and various other things like that. And you can place most of those. So you've got a rough idea in your head, but it gets a little more detailed than that, as this will show you. So this is a map of the feathers that are on a bird, and you will see there are quite a lot of them. So let's think about the wings. Well, they've got quite a lot of things going on in the wings. So there are lesser coverts, median coverts, greater coverts, tertiaries, secondaries, primaries, and they're all on the wing. So if somebody says to you, oh, look at the tips to the greater coverts, and if you look on a great tip, for instance, it's got little white marks on those. They will be the edgings. I think actually they're the median coverts in a great tip rather than the greater coverts. But those tips to these feathers that I'm pointing to will form the wing bars on birds. And then you look at, this is a bunting. You look at its head pattern, it's really quite complicated in terms of names like crown stripe and eye stripe and supercilium and moustachial and submalar and what have you. But it's daunting at first, but the more you know about these, you can say, well, I saw a bird with X. And in fact, if you were looking at the waxwing, you'd say it had chestnut red under tail coverts, which is a characteristic of waxwing. And there aren't many other birds that have that. So I put 3 more up for you. Here's a bunting, a wader in the middle and a gull to the right. And all of them have got the same feathers, but they've got different structures. So the wader in the middle here has hardly got a tail at all that's visible. The gulls is also here shorter than the end of the primaries, whereas here on the bunting, the tail extends well beyond the end of the primaries, which I'm just pointing to here. So it really is helpful if somebody says, oh, look at the chevrons on the flanks, you know that you've got to look at this area here. Pardon me. And here are the under tail coverts. And then some have more complicated head patterns than others, particularly things like buntings and sparrows and some warblers. Waders tend to be plainer. And again, we can look at structure here. You've got the head and a reasonably same length bill on the wader, but with a gull, the bill is shorter and the head is longer. And on a bunting, it's even smaller. Okay, so get these ideas of feathers being in the same place on all birds, but having different proportions. So as a final bit on this slide, you can see here that we've got the tertials, which overlap against the secondaries, and then you've got the primaries. But on the wader, there's just the tip of the primaries here, and the tertials are overlapping everything. So let's have a look in a bit more detail at this map on the right, and we'll go to the next slide. Here's that same bunting, and we can look at topography again and say it really is essential, just like birdsong is, and it will take time for you to build up the knowledge. Don't worry about it. It's bit by bit, brick by brick. So if, for instance, we think about structure, we can say that a red kite has got a forked tail, but a buzzard has got a round tail. That's structure. But both twite and linnet have got notched tails. That is to say, they've got this little notch, and the central tail feathers here are slightly shorter than the outer tail feathers. Similarly, if you look at a grey wagtail, its tail is longer proportionately than a pied wag's, and you can even see this in flight. A really long-tailed wagtail is likely to be a grey wagtail. Greater spotted woodpecker, let's think about that. If you can picture a greater spot, it's a black and white woodpecker. It's got red on the nape, but it has a black mantle, which is this piece of feathering on the back, but it's got white scapulars, those lovely white marks. You look at a green woodpecker, both of them are green. So knowing what bits you're looking at and being able to describe those colors will help you zone in on the ID. Oh, I know it wasn't that because it didn't have white scapulars, and so on and so forth. So it's important to know these. It is hard at first, but I promise you it will pay dividends, and it will really, you'll see much more on a bird if you start to be able to place the feathers on its map that you've got here. And like all things, the more you know, the easier it becomes, and you can build on things and be able to get down to the finer detail. So do practice. And when you're looking at your robin in the garden or your blackbird, see if you can place, you don't have to go out and find some special rare bunting to do this. Just look at the birds that come to your feeder or the breadcrumbs or the local robin and see if you can see these feathers. And okay, that's where the eye stripe is, or that's where the malar stripe is. Okay. Plumage. Plumage. Now, some things are so obvious that you don't even have to look at structure. You don't even have to go through steps 1 to 8. They're just absolutely unmistakable. And I've got a couple that are coming up here. So you can forget steps to 9 if it's a real wowzer. Have a look at these top 2. I hope that many of you will be able to get the one on the right. It's a firecrest, and this on the left, the black and white job, is a hoopoe. You know, hoopoes merit a word in the birding law which is unmistakable. Nothing else looks like a hoopoe. So you don't need to, you know, and these are not regular visitors. They're a bit of a scarce migrant, but if you see one, you'll know it. It can't be anything else. Firecrest, well, you might get confused with goldcrest, but it's a much brighter, much more strikingly face patterned bird than goldcrest. Just checking my notes for a second. So, but there are some which aren't as obvious, that don't have bright colors. Have a look at the bottom 3. What the hell's coming? I'm about to put some pictures up. They've got no bright colors, and they're all LBJs, the curse of many birders. They're all little brown jobs. So here they are. And you think, oh, what are these? What are these? But actually, you don't need to be concerned with looking at, I mean, this bunting here. In fact, we've got 2 buntings. This has got an eye stripe. It's got an ear spot. It's got a moustachial stripe, a submoustachial stripe. It's got streaking on the flanks, not so much as this bird has. And this one over here doesn't have any flank streaking, but it does have a wing bar here, which is the median coverts being with white tips. Okay, and there's a bit of a mark of the same thing on this bird. But if we go back to habitat, it becomes a lot easier, because this one at the top left here, you'll find in wet places with reeds. Now, this one on the right here, you will find in hedges and near houses. And this one you will find in open fields. So you don't find this one, well, you can find it in open fields, but you certainly don't find it in sort of wet patches with reeds. And you won't find this one at the bottom here sitting on your house. So knowing where you've seen them already gives you the clues. Now, I have cheated a bit here because these are all females. And what we have here, in fact, is a female reed bunting. To the right is a female house sparrow, and this is a corn bunting. So going to the right habitat will enable you to see these. But even so, if you didn't know where it was and you saw one of these and you were tuned into the topography, the feather maps, and where the colors are, you would have been able to identify these. So a lot of ID comes by a process of elimination. It has this and that, but not that, and so on. Or it doesn't have that, so it can't be one of those. So plumage, pishing, you remember I told you about pishing last night. Plumage can be really helpful, but it can be confusing. But the more you know, the easier it becomes to identify birds, and know your common stuff first of all. So, you know, in Hampshire, know what a female house sparrow looks like, know what a female reed bunting like, and then you'll be able to say, well, I know it's not one of those two, therefore it could be a corn bunting. More on plumage now. And the thing is, birds have feathers, and that's a real trouble, because you can have feathers that can be different on exactly the same species. And for different sexes, different ages, and different seasons, they can be different. What the hell's going on here? These are both robins, believe it or not. And this one is a recently fledged youngster, and it will turn into this one. You can all recognize this one, but how confident are you of seeing a young robin? Now, this young robin will molt into this adult form in the same year as it was born. And you may occasionally see, I had one in my garden about, I suppose, 3 months ago, where it was really starting to show the red through the breast and to molt all the speckledy feathers on the mantle and the greater coverts here, and so on and so forth. So this youngster has got a bit of a wing bar on its greater coverts. That means the greater coverts are tipped, but on the adult, they're not there. Okay, so different sexes, sorry, not different sexes, different ages, different seasons. Here's two more you should recognize. These are blackbirds, and they are different all year round. So the male's black with the yellow beak, and the females are all brown with a sort of a horn-colored beak. And then we've got these guys. What's going on here? Now, youngster, adult with the robins, male, female with the blackbirds, but these are both males here, these mallards. And what happens is he adopts his finery, this fine drake here, so that he can pull in the ladies during the breeding season. But once he's done all that, he thinks, God, I need a rest. So he takes that opportunity to molt and turn into what is known as eclipse plumage, where he's a bit dowdier, he's less likely to be predated by something because he's not in so bright colors, he blends more into the background. So you need to know that all birds molt at some point, and molt can and does change their appearance. Now, molt, I have to tell you, is a huge subject all by itself. And to add spice, some birds don't molt all their feathers every year. So robins do, but large gulls, and we'll come on to talk about those in a minute, can take up to 4 years to reach maturity. And big birds of prey, like golden eagles, can take up to 6. And believe it or not, there are 1 or 2 people that I know who are able to age birds of prey simply by the state of their molt. So plumage and molt sure add to the fun of birding, and it's can be quite complex, but as your knowledge grows, so will your confidence, and you'll be able to discern. But again, get to know your common ones first, and these are 3 good common species. See if you can find a drake mallard in eclipse, and then you can look at it and understand. Right, variation. Ooh, how are we doing? So all birds have many different plumages, but remain the same species. And they can range from fluffy chicks in the nest to adult birds building that nest. And variation can be a crux of all finer level ID challenges. So when you look at your local buzzards, I could almost predict that none of them will be identical. Indeed, in French, its name is buse variable, which is a variable buzzard, not common buzzard. And I actually think it's probably a better description of the bird. They vary enormously, and some people have done very intense studies of buzzards and are able to individually identify, in the same way as some people can identify elephants in Africa or lions, tigers, what have you. This chap that I know can identify individual buzzards and has plotted their lifestyles. So how does variation occur? Well, it's got 5 broad categories, which are as follows. There's age, there's sex, and we've already seen some indications of those. There's seasonal, geographical, and there's individual. So let's start with age. Now, age, birds, as I've indicated, can vary from the downy nestlings through their juvenile plumage and other plumages all the way up to adulthood. And I'm about to put up some pics which will assist you to understand this. Now, these are all herring gulls, and herring gulls are what is known as a 4-year gull. Smaller gulls like black-headed gull take 2 years to get to maturity. Herring gulls take 4 or sometimes 5. So you've got some downy chicks here, and these little chaps turn into this one at the top right, first calendar year bird, second, third, fourth, and indeed fifth. And what I'd like you to notice is the progression in the feathers. Now, the progression is most obvious between the chicks and the juvenile, the first calendar year bird. But then you start to see things changing. So if I look at this, let's have a look at some obvious things. Let's look at the bill, first of all. It's black. Here, it's black, but it's starting to go pale at the base, both upper and lower mandibles. Here, in the third year, calendar year bird, the yellow is starting to appear, but it's still got a hefty black tip. By its 4th year, it's got yellow, and it's got the distinctive red patch, the gonidial patch that we look for. And then you can notice other things. This is a brown and white speckledy bird. This one is brown and white speckledy, but there are hints of grey. On this one, the grey is far more pronounced, and these are the mantle feathers. And then you've got the wings here with the median, greater coverts, and so on and so forth, secondaries, tertials, and then the primaries. And the speckleding is going on the breast. It's becoming more white. Here in the 4th calendar year, the grey is mainly throughout the bird. The bill is fully formed, and the eye colour is really starting to come through. Dark, dark, still dark, but pale, beginning to get a bit of paleness and yellow in it. More pronounced, really pronounced in the adult bird here. That's got that typical herring gull, fierce look on its face. The adult bird has got completely grey upper parts, and it's got white tips to the tertials, which are here. On these ones, there is still some of the mottling on the tertials, and also on some of the scapulas, which are just sitting here. And the leg colour, it's pronounced very much from about the sort of first calendar year here through 2nd, 3rd, 4th. On the youngsters here, the downy chicks, they're a dark grey, and then they start to pale up as you go through. So looking at gulls can be quite instructive. They're all the same species. They're all herring gulls. So please note how the feathers change from brown through to grey and white, and check out the bills and eyes, which is what we've done. Another bit about variation, which is sex, which is the next one, is some males of the species are more brightly coloured than the females and remain so all year round. They are what is known as sexually dimorphic or dichromatic. Dichromatic means 2 colours. So here's a pair of blackbirds, and I'll let you decide which is the lady and which is the gent. But it isn't always so that the gents are more brightly coloured. For those of you who don't know, this is a pair of redneck phalaropes, and the gentleman is paying attention to the lady, let me put it like that. But she is more brightly coloured, And this reflects the roles here that they play. His lordship, the chap on top, is the one who nurtures, incubates and cares for the young. All she does is attract the males, lays the eggs, and then frankly goes away. So he needs to be dowdier and not so noticeable to predators when he's on the ground. So you have a reversal of the sexual roles here, and therefore the plumage. And these, as I say, are redneck phalaropes. Sometimes there is no difference in the colors. So these kingfishers are the same size, but sometimes you have a size differential, as is noticeable. So I'm just going to have a glug of, as you will notice in these peregrines. Now, some of you may know that there's a reasonable rule in falcons, which peregrines are, that the females are larger than the males. And you can clearly see this is a bonded pair. He's just caught something and is passing it across to her, and here's the nest box over there. She's on the left and he's on the right. And she's saying, well done, dear, thanks very much. Now, he looks smaller, and in certain cases can be up to a third smaller than the female. And this is the origin of the term for male falcons, who are sometimes known as tiercels, because a tierce in Old English is a third, and so the male is 1/3 smaller. So you have the falcon, which usually refers to the female, and the tiercel is the male. But that isn't, hang on, let me just I'm getting ahead of myself. Right. For seasonal, so that was sex, let's turn on to seasonal. For seasonal, there's no better example than the ruff. And here it's even more bizarre because all of the males vary from one another. And it's the females who stay the same all the year round. So here's a female at bottom left here, but all the other 4 birds are males, and they're all different from one another. And here's why they're called a ruff, because you've got this fantastic rufflet of feathers around the neck. But look how different they are. But there are other ways that seasonal changes can change the way birds look. This is a male house sparrow, but he didn't have a black bib when he molted his feathers last year. You can see at the bottom here, they were tinged grey. And what happens is the feathers are always black and tinged grey all the way up to under his chin. But as the season comes on and it comes towards the breeding season, these feathers abrade their tips. And so the black that's underlying becomes more and more apparent. And another example of this is the common starling. This is a male. You can tell by his blue bottom to the beak. Females have a slightly pink base to the bill. And what's happened is if you look at them at the moment in your backyard when they're feeding on the fat balls or whatever, they're all speckledy. But those speckles wear off as the breeding season approaches. So look at them in March and April, and they will start to have this fantastic sheeny plumage. So some are by molt, but some are by abrasion and feather wear. Right, then we come on to other bits of variation. And we've got 2 left to go, which are geographical and individual. Now, I've already talked about individual. Buzzards are all individuals, and you can spot the different one. If I look out of my garden, there's often a pale one, and there's certainly 2 or 3 browner and darker ones, but they are noticeably different. Let's talk about geographical. Geographical refers to the variation of birds' appearances across their distribution. Now, within the UK, this is rare, but it does occur, and I've got an example here. These are wrens, troglodytes, troglodytes. This is the one on the left here that we will see in our gardens down here in Hampshire. But if you go further north and you go up to the northernmost isles of Britain, and you go to Faroes and you go to Iceland, the birds there are slightly larger, they are darker, and they have longer bill and legs than their mainland counterparts. Some people will even tell you that there are distinct races of wrens on Fair Isle, and some people even on the Isles of Scilly. So isolation can drive plumages. They're still both wrens, but the boys up north are bigger and they are browner. And I have seen this with my own eyes. They do look distinctly different. Sometimes we get this in the UK. These are long-tailed tits, and normal one we get is on the left here. But occasionally when winters are really severe, we get some of the Scandinavian and Northern European populations pushed over here, and they have these fantastic white heads. Now I've never seen a white-headed long-tailed tit, but you know what beautiful little birds they are, and they are another example of geographical variation that can occur and that we might see. Getting a bit more technical, geography, and I think somebody asked me about subspecies for the last talk, can lead to splitting of species. And you have heard me talk about splitting and lumping with respect to chiffchaffs and shrikes. And this is a story that concerns a particular species of bird, which when I were a lad, it was just one species, and it had 5 subspecies, which were split across the geographical areas that they lived in. And they were, you know, on the plumage front, they were distinctly different. But it's gone further than that, because DNA and other research has led to these subspecies being viewed as sufficiently distinct to merit full species status. And the bird I'm particularly talking about is in fact subalpine warbler. I'm sorry the print isn't quite as clear, but subalpine warbler is now 3 species. There's eastern, western, and Maltese warbler, and each of these has a specific distribution. They don't interbreed, and they have various stages of plumage and their DNA, which has led people to say these are now distinct. So, as I say, when I were a lad, subalpine warbler had just 5 species. Now those are distributed as follows. So eastern's got 2 subspecies, western has got 2, and Maltese is all on its own. It doesn't have a subspecies, so it is a proper, fully registered species in its own right. And believe it or not, all 3 of these species have occurred in the UK. So you'll remember at the start we talked about taxonomy. So this splitting of these species is taxonomy in action. Now, I don't think they're going to split the wrens, and I don't think they're going to split the long-tailed tits. But the more we know, the more the scientists and the more that birders in the field look at birds and listen to their calls, look at their breeding habitats and habits, the more it is likely we will see the number of species increase. Keeping with variation, we come to individual. This can be really testing. So individual variation is perhaps the biggest hurdle to mastering tough ID challenges. And by definition, variation is variable. And I've got some pics which demonstrate this. These are both Arctic skuas. Here's a light phase, light morph, and here's a dark phase. So absolutely identical with the species. And there have been studies on these done on places like Fair Isle, where they've looked at the mating of these. And more often than not, you'll find that there's in a pair, there's one dark phase bird and one light phase bird. Occasionally you will get pale phase birds nesting together, but there are been quite a lot of intensive work on Arctic skuas. But these are exactly the same bird, but the variation, as I'm sure you will agree, is striking. Anybody want a pair of kingfishers? Believe it or not, you've got your ordinary one on the left here, and this is an albino kingfisher. Now, I'm cheating a bit here because this is a genetic mutation. This has no pigments. Actually, I beg your pardon, this is leucistic, because if it was an albino, it would have a pink eye. It doesn't, but it has lost all of its pigments. But this is the common kingfisher. But most people would say it's albino. It isn't. It's actually a leucistic one, which means it's lost all of its its pigments. We have more familiar birds which have phases, different colors, individual variation. Tawny owls, you've got a grey phase and you've got a rufous phase. You can see both in this country. There's no distribution like there is on the wrens. they occur alongside one another. And as you look more closely, you will see more. And as ever with birding, the devil is in the detail. And sometimes it can be a real devil. Have a look at this, and I'll let you study it for a few moments. So the question is, can you get to a family? And then, can you get to a genus? And then, can you get to a species? Now, this is really rare. It's a bird of prey. It's a harrier. And in fact, what at the bottom right, this is the rare, really rare dark morph of a male Montagu's harrier. Now, Montagu's harrier is a rare bird in Hampshire. We occasionally get 2 or 3 on passage that come through. It's a rare breeding bird. We do get them. But if you were to see one of these anywhere, you should be leaping up and down because it's absolutely magical. They are a fantastic bird. So so we talked about individual variation. Some are quite common. I don't think many white kingfishers have been seen. Tawny owls are all around us, as are ordinary kingfishers. But Montagu's harriers, that's really, really quite special. So we've been out in the field. We've done most of the steps and we've come to number 11. And you think, well, you know, that was great. Obviously, I've seen a lot, I've observed a lot. How do you keep track of what you've seen? And this is where notes come in. Notes can achieve many things. For instance, I know some folk, all they do in terms of their note taking is they write the date and place they see each species in their field guides. So they know when they've seen it and they know when I saw it, and that's as much as they do. Others go a little further and religiously carry a proper field notebook and make notes as they go along. They're counting the birds, where they are, the numbers. Sometimes they're doing notes on a particularly interesting piece of behavior or a field mark that they've seen. And then perhaps they go a step further, they go home and they get out their formal field journal and will write up religiously on a daily basis all of the notes that they have seen, and they build a stock of these over the years, and perhaps they've got a particular interest in a place or a species or whatever it may be, but they go to town because from that they then are able to write up their notes, make submissions and so on and so forth. However, whilst the manual will work for some folks, in my lifetime, notes and record keeping have moved pretty much from manual to digital, although there are still times when recording things manually can make a difference and help you decide what you've seen. And the birding material has also become digital. So many of you will know that I've referred to this earlier on, which I still use, but this is now in electronic form. You can put it on your phone. And many birders these days just reach straight for their mobiles and their cameras, and to them pencil and paper or old hat. In fact, I have one friend who was thinking about this, and he was an ardent buyer of bird books, really built his knowledge up. And then he made not a life-changing, but a significant decision. He said, you know what, I'm getting rid of all my bird books. And I go, really? What are you doing that for? He says, because I can get it all on here. And I've got it in my pocket and it's with me all the time. And I could just call up anything I want. So he's not only got the Phillips Field Guide, he's got every one of the big reference books because they've all been digitized. And the other thing that's happened in my lifetime, in fact, probably in the last 20 years, has been the explosion of digital photography. In the old days, you used to have to carry around that big wooden box, and it was on a stand, and then we got to sort of point cameras, which were still cumbersome, and then we got to SLR, single lens reflex cameras, but we were still using old technology. We're still using film. These days, anybody can take a half decent photo or a record shot of a bird. There are point and shoot cameras. You see people in the field who are carrying quite big telephoto lenses. It's extraordinary. Or if you don't want to do that, you can do what I occasionally do, which is You take your mobile and take a picture through your telescope. And here's one I prepared earlier, and you'll say, oh, that's a lovely shot of a kingfisher. And you're right, it is a kingfisher, but believe it or not, this is a new species to you. This is, which we don't have in the UK, this is half-collared kingfisher, which in fact I took when I was lucky enough to go to Ethiopia. But you can do remarkably good shots of birds. So all I was doing was sort of hovering my phone over the object lens of my telescope, and I managed to take that. So the message is digital is extraordinary these days, quite extraordinary. And it's gone further than that. You're all familiar with, you know, the growth of social media and sharing and what have you. And you can upload your records now. So you don't even need a notebook. You can have a virtual notebook, a software notebook, an e-notebook. And there are two well-known softwares. There's one from BirdTrack from the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology. And there's another one run by Cornell called eBird. And you can see people tapping in their things as they go, their records as they go. I saw 3 black-tailed godwits. I saw 4 redshanks. And they're putting in the place, the date, the time, and the numbers. And then what happens is those data can be used, and what you can do with these data is fantastic. So if, for instance, you want to see how swallows are coming back and the summer migration is going into the UK, you can go on to BirdTrack and you can watch the patterns actually on your screen evolve, because many hundreds of observers are now putting their records directly onto BirdTrack and eBird, and that enables then other people, if they have a particular interest, what are the early and late dates of swallows? I can look, I can find out, I can analyze all these records and see the patterns of distributions. How far north do nuthatches go? Right, okay, I can have a look at it. So digital power is incredible. And having had the amusing time with the sound last night, I'm going to play you a call. And you think, well, that wasn't very inspiring, but actually it was. And the circumstances in which it was captured were even more extraordinary. So you probably heard a bit of a shriek type call and a bit of a squawk. And what happened was there was a birder on Fular, which is one of the islands up in Shetland. He was on his own, and he thought he was on to a good bird, which indeed it proves that he was. But this thing was really flighty, and he couldn't get onto it. So he got out his mobile phone and switched it to video mode and pointed it in the direction of the bird, hoping that he might capture something. But it was done with a forethought, because he wasn't really interested in capturing, although it would have been nice to capture some shots of the bird. What he really wanted to do was to capture the call, because birding software now enables you to trap calls and analyze them. And what he had found, in fact, was a Blythe's pipit, which is a pretty rare bird. But this call, as I've said in last night's talk, sound is cryptic, and it will get you right to species. And he submitted this to the British Birds Rarities Committee, and it was accepted, and this was a crucial part of his evidence. He was able to write a manual description, but this call that he took and captured on his mobile phone was critical to the ID. So if you try doing that with pencil and paper, you haven't got a chance. You can't wave a piece of paper at a bird calling and say, oh, can you just trap the call there? It's really hard work transcribing calls. You can attempt it, but it's not the same as having an actual recording. So you have to work out what's good for you. Okay, I'm not telling you to do any of these things. Some of them may work, some of them may not. But you can look back on your notes and it can remind you, oh, I went on that trip, or I went to this place and I saw that. And it can invoke those really happy memories that you had when you found your first kingfisher, or you saw your first whatever it might be. Okay. But it's gone further than that now. So I'm about to show you a picture of this. which is the latest from Swarovski. Now, it's a monocular, so it's got one lens on it, but it's also a camera. So here's the lens and here's the camera. And believe it or not, this thing links to your mobile phone. And on your mobile phone, there is now a thing called the Merlin Bird ID phone app. So you put the photo in, you take the photo, it sends it across to your phone from this Swarovski monocular, and the bird ID then proposes a species that it could be. Now, I'm not doing any selling here, I'm merely reporting, so I have no connection with Swarovski. I'm not in any commission or anything like that. So we've done step 12, and now it's time to summarize. So it's a wrap, nearly. So let's use our bird ID in 12 steps, and here we go. So here are the 12 steps, and here's the little phrase that I put together. So we'll start with T. Here you are, you see a bird, and you're sure it's not a leaf or a piece of paper or a mammal. You know it's a bird, so that's a good start. You're in Hampshire. Fantastic, good county, good birds. So that's location. Come on, there we go. Habitat. You're walking by a chalk stream with banked sides, and a small tripe rises to the surface. So you can see that you're in a good chalk stream in Hampshire. It's a bit chilly, season, and it's autumn. So you walk briskly to keep warm. Fortunately, it's a bright sunny day, and you've got the light behind you. So you're not looking into the sun and it's not glinting off the water for the stream. Your bird, you've seen something in the distance, D for distance. Your bird's sitting on a twig, poking out of the bank some 20 meters away. And you think, okay. So taxonomy, it's a bird, location, habitat, season, light, distance. And every so often it does a behavior. So it bobs and its head's changing position with each bob. Suddenly it takes off at a rate of knots with a fast whirring flight before hovering briefly and then diving into the water. It re-emerges, not having caught anything, and it flies on. And then it does something wonderful. It calls. Structure, S. So when perched, when you first got onto it, you saw it was compact, it was robin-sized, it had a short tail, bill as long as the head, but you couldn't see its feet when it was perched, so it's probably got short legs. You saw the bill was black, plumage, but most of all in flight, you noticed the flash of blue back and rump. Then, hurrah, it turns round, flies straight past you and catch sight of orange underparts and a flash of white on the neck. Variation. Incredibly, another one flies past you. But at the moment, there isn't any variation here. It's identical. So you've got a pair. Now, notes, oh my God, it's all getting a bit exciting. The adrenaline's going. Some of you will already have got there. You managed to take some notes, or you jabber into the mobile, say, it's got this, it's got that, it's got the other, and then hurriedly you search your bird ID app, or you dig out your field guide. So you're flipping through the pages and bingo, job's a good one. You've got a kingfisher. Well done. Oh, and are you checking? It's a male. Look at that black lower mandible. So folks, thanks very much for your time and good birding always. And I'm done. So I'll pass you back to Barry. Thanks.
Ian, once again, many thanks for tonight's talk. Fascinating. Hopefully, many of us are now better equipped to get out in the field and identify even more birds than with more confidence than perhaps we've had till now. I'll just pause as ever to see if there's any final questions. Otherwise, wrap up some one or two thanks coming through. Which is always nice to receive. So thanks for those. Plenty of plaudits coming through, Ian. So well done.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, looks slow. We're gonna finish with those. I think no questions tonight by the looks of it. So, Ian, I'll thank you again. Thank you to everyone who's participated and joined us over the last couple of nights. As ever, they say, this will be recorded. Is being recorded. It will be posted tonight and should be on hopefully sometime tomorrow. And heads up that our next talk, communication will go out for a talk in 2 weeks' time, which will be on specifically on ducks. And I'm sure we'll be drawing on some of the steps you've also shared with us tonight, Ian. So thanks again, Ian, for tonight. We are a wrap in that regard. So thanks, everyone. Take care, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, Ian.
Bye, folks. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
birding. See you in the field soon. Bye now.